Are you ready?
Hello. I'm
Okay,
super
let's
excited.
start. Hey, I'm Scotty T from Your Comedy Minute. I'm joined today by Jennica Sadhwani from Multispective Podcast. Jennica, I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. This is so
How are you
exciting.
doing?
I'm good. Yeah, having a
Yeah.
great day, coming close to Christmas, New Year. So, feeling the,
Okay.
the Christmas spirit.
Are you? Okay. Yeah, I have a mistletoe belt I wear.
Oh,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding you.
getting them
Uh,
kisses.
well, Jenica, I wanted to start before we get into the Multispective podcast. I wanted to talk a little about you because now you just told me you're in Shanghai,
Yeah, that's
but
correct.
you were born in Hong Kong.
Yeah. So I was
And
born
that's
and raised in Hong Kong, spent the last about 4 years here in Shanghai. I've been living here for some time now.
okay. And if I'm right, you're a teacher, is that correct?
Yes, full-time teacher, part-time podcaster.
Okay. Do you teach English?
So yes, I teach grade two little kids. So I teach English, science, some basic subjects, core subjects.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
great
And
fun.
I was going to ask you, that was going to be my next question. What do you find more fulfilling, being the teacher or doing the podcasts?
Honestly, I feel like this is a question that I've like thought about so much. I feel like I'm
Okay.
that kind of person. Like my dopamine kick is like, what is fulfilling this purpose, this bigger, larger purpose in my life. And so it was, it started off with a career, and then it was like, oh, what can I do in my free time and my spare time to like
Okay.
continue to help people? So I would say like in very different ways, both. With little
Okay.
kids, you're molding them from like, a blank piece of
Sure.
paper, and you're creating their personalities. Where on the podcast, people have already established their lives, but they're talking about
Right.
their trials and tribulations and how they came out of it. And when you have
Right.
people, listeners coming back to me saying, "Oh, I learned so much," or I felt such a sense of belonging from this. It's a very different kind of validation you get from both. Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, let me just cover because I wrote down a lot of stuff. The multispective podcast, you have obviously the podcast, which I think there's 38 of those up,
Yeah.
but you also have a YouTube channel, uh, 141 subscribers, 102 videos, 13,758 views. And the reason I bring all that up is because there's 102 videos, yet there's only 38 podcasts.
Yeah.
And it looks like it started as a COVID lockdown live. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, you are correct. And we
Okay,
got
yeah,
quite a lot of response from that. And so we're like, oh, And we also had some listeners from our podcast coming back and saying, we want to see the facial expressions of your guests. Like, why don't you show us your guests? And we're
right.
like, okay, I guess people want to see this, and not just hear it. So that's why we're like, okay, let's try to transition into like having video podcast episodes too.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
had Scott on from what was that like?
Yeah.
His
Great
podcast, and
guy.
I think he
Great
just
guy.
does audio. I don't think he does the video, which is what attracted me to yours because you have that other person there and you can see their reactions,
Yeah,
so on and so
for
forth.
sure.
But so it started as Lockdown Live, which I'm guessing was during COVID.
Yeah. I don't know
And
if you heard
then,
about what was going on in Shanghai during the lockdown or COVID times. We went into like a 2-month lockdown
yeah,
where we
yeah.
were not allowed to leave our house at
Okay.
all for 2 months. And so government was sending over like boxes of food and stuff. And it
I
was
was
like
going to
all of
ask how you got
international
food and
news.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Okay.
was it was crazy. So everyone had to like work from home. If you stepped out, you got caught, you could, literally get fined and stuff. Like
Okay.
the streets were empty. There were barricades on the streets. It was crazy. It was a crazy time.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people started showing interest, like what's going on in Shanghai right now? How are people surviving?
Right.
Relationships were breaking apart because they were like 24 hours with my partner. Like I can deal with you for like 5 hours, but more than that, it's like it's crazy.
Right.
Um, so there was a lot of interest in people wanting to know what was going on here. So that's sort of where we started out.
And
Yeah.
not to interrupt you, then it went on to Real Talk.
Yes.
Okay, Real Talk. That I looked at a couple of those. You had I think a Michelin star chef that you
Yep.
interviewed,
Yep.
and see, I did look. It's too early to be
Done
drinking.
your research.
Hey, if I'm going to have you on, I want to make sure I got my, I got, at the end of this, after we cover, I got to tell you what happened last night because you just won't believe it.
Tell
But
me. Yeah.
tell the people, we kind of brushed on a little bit. Tell the people about Multispective podcast. Your latest episode is called Foster Care to Violence. Your first one was Caged Minds. Is that right?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
So explain to
We've
the people what your podcast is about.
Yeah. So, similar to what was that like, what we do is we feature stories about individuals all around the world. And these stories can, range from things like mental health related things, but they can also
Right,
be like really unique stories or experiences. So we've had guests that like hiked up Mount Kilimanjaro and summited during a
right,
snowstorm, right? And we've also have stories of, people with like interesting gifts, like synesthesia was something that I heard about and learned about sort of a little bit more in detail on air. And it was really fascinating to learn that. But then we've also had like bank robbers, and we've had
I like
individuals who,
I like the sex worker. That was my favorite.
right?
No,
I
and
was like,
you know
okay,
it's I got to interject because I actually know a friend of mine worked at the Bunny Ranch in Reno, Nevada. Prostitution is legal in Nevada, but not in Las Vegas. And I
right. And you're
watched.
like, what?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me. My son lives in Vegas, and I was out there numerous times. And like I said, when I saw that one, I said, "Oh, I got to check this out," and that was very interesting.
Right? It was just like a change your mind sort of situation. There was a moment where I was like, hold on a minute. Like all of these like preconceived notions I had about like, prostitution in the industry, she really like threw a wrench into like my whole idea understanding of it and just made me realize that hey, it can be like any other industry if it was only treated and given the sort of like space, the legal space to sort of stand, right?
Right,
And it was interesting. She was like, I'm educated. I have worked in like regular industries and I've chosen this path for me. So, we are not full of, we don't necessarily come from messed up backgrounds. We don't have to be uneducated.
right.
Like we can, if only people accepted it and understood it. So it's really interesting. Yeah.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions to you. And Scott didn't like it when I asked him the question, but I want to ask you: do you have a favorite episode, or do you have any that you wish, boy, I wish I wouldn't have done that one?
Honestly, this is such a
I
tough
don't mean
one
to put
because you
you
know
on the
what?
spot. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
yeah. The thing is, it's really difficult to say because I think like they've all impacted me in very, very different ways.
Okay.
Um, and but I would say some of the ones that really impacted me maybe would have been the first few episodes, but it was only because there was a novelty aspect of it, right? I didn't know what to do going in. I
Right.
think those were like the first ones that taught me so much about myself.
Okay.
All of the episodes have been very interesting in different ways in molding the way that
Okay.
I see the world and the way that I function in this world. But I think like the impactful ones were the first few because it was my learning growth. It was people coming
Right.
back to me and saying, "Hey, you can do it differently. You can do it this way. Hey, like why don't you need to be a bit more confident or you need to like, make it a bit more personal." So those were the ones that kind of really taught me how to podcast a bit more. Um,
Okay.
but in terms of like the episode content itself, man, it's a tough question.
It's okay.
They're
You
all
don't.
they're all so unique.
Yeah,
Yeah, in
I
their
don't
own
want to. I
way.
don't want to. I don't want to ever pressure anyone into answering something that you don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Uh, because I'll say this: this is a dream. Obviously, there's a huge difference in age between us, and it has been a dream of mine to be able to do what we're doing. It took some. First off, I'm 61 years old. I got fired from my job at Lowe's for telling jokes, and that's how your comedy minute started. And I always saw these Zoom, and I thought, well, I'd love to be able to do that. And I think you're right. The first couple I did, I was, kind of like, wow, this is wild,
All
you
right.
know. But there's some that I've done that oh man, you get them one there and they just don't talk. It's like one word answers. It's like, bud,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to entertain people here.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
You,
sure.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and like there were a couple of episodes that I have previously done in the past where, I've had to sort of like stop and think, okay, what are the listeners going to want to know about this episode, right? And
Right.
sometimes you're gonna have to maybe touch on topics that are really uncomfortable for the guest. But the thing is, like, I've always gone back to speak to the guest, privately beforehand, be like, hey, look, like, we may touch on topics that are a little bit uncomfortable for you, but just kindly note that, listeners would be having these questions, so I will be asking them to you anyway. But of course, we can discuss about what you would like to have and whatnot, and we can edit it out accordingly. But just to remember that there is, I think, like a certain level of connection that we want our listeners to have with the guests, which
Right.
might require you to be a little bit raw and vulnerable in certain areas.
Sure.
um and also, there's also that validity aspect of it. Like, I trust what the guest's story is, but sometimes they're so, like, wow, like it's so far away from a reality of ours. So how can I make sure that our listeners are listening and actually sort of believing the story that's being told as well, which is a really tough one because, you know, um, i- we have to remember that it's a personal story, is their own personal perspective of it,
Right.
right? We don't know how objectively true the story is. So, give me as much as you can for our listeners to really, really like engage with that story, right?
Right. Yeah,
So,
I asked Scott that same question if he'd ever done a podcast where, it wasn't true or whatever, and he said no, he does the research beforehand. But yeah,
mhm.
I was curious about that, whether there's any that you've ever had to scrap because, you took the time, you interviewed him, whatever, and then thought, nah, I can't do this.
Yeah, I mean, there has been, very, very rarely, probably just like one or two episodes. And I thought maybe it was because it is a bit too intense for our public, like, to listen
Okay.
to. Um, they were topics that I just felt like it's going to be really controversial, and no one. It's very, very hard to grasp. I feel, and again, there's no way that there's sort of like evidence that can be provided for something like this. It was more like, 20 years down the line, I recalled this and I
Okay.
remembered certain things in my past. And I was
Okay.
like, okay, did you go to a therapist? Did you confront those family members that did this or something? And it was like, no, I didn't. And I was like, okay, let's just,
Right.
take a step back from this and, like, think about
Yeah.
how we approach it. But it's been a really interesting journey. I'd have to say, the stories that we've had on air are just like, there's a world out there that exists that I never thought people could fathom or live, and
Oh,
they
Jenica,
have.
I have two that popped into my mind, but I'm going to save them till the end because I want to hear more of your take on it.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
see, with me, I do I try to be serious and then interject a little humor here or there. Scott was worried about that.
Mhm.
Um, and so you like you, I'm kind of just feeling this out, like having different people on. I think that other person is so important because if you have someone that just sits there, yo, uh-huh, yeah,
Yeah.
that click,
You're
I'm
like,
gone,
okay,
I'm gone.
what do I say now?
Yeah, I had one that I about 10 minutes in, I thought, you've got to give me some more, bud. You've got to give me something.
Yeah, exactly. You
Yeah,
try to ask all these open-ended questions, and you try to, like, probe and probe, and yeah, it doesn't come
yeah.
out. Yeah. Yeah.
Some people, I wonder why they even want to come on because it's like, okay, now you're on, and I don't know if they get scared or what,
Yeah.
that
Honestly,
okay,
it's a real thing, man. Like, I did not realize how difficult it was being on air, especially like when I'm doing an episode with a guest. I try to remember that it's a conversation with a person. But when I'm doing like the intros to the episode, that's me talking to the camera. I'm literally looking
right,
at the camera.
right,
I still, until today, freeze. So the very first few episodes, what I started doing was just like reading from a script, but a lot of
right,
people said that that's not very personal. Start talking to the camera. And I was like,
right.
okay.
Yeah. It's like me right now, and I find myself where I'm looking at you and my
Yeah,
camera's up
exactly.
there. So it's like Scott, I find myself doing this. I feel like an idiot. I feel like one of those donkey birds,
Yeah.
Okay, look at the camera. But my eyes don't work like that. It's like I want to look at
Right.
you and pay attention to you, but up there's the camera.
Exactly. Yeah. We're
Yeah,
not
it's
there with
funny.
technology yet. We haven't reached that kind of
And you
technology.
touched on something there, Jenica, that when I started doing this coming up on 4 years ago doing comedy, and I would do these Your Comedy Minute quickies, and someone said, "Why don't you look at the camera, bud?" And it dawned, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
look at that little dot. It's
Right.
just funny how you don't, and like you said, I guess what made me think of, when you are in front of the camera,
Mhm.
that's a whole different dang job. Lots of people say that, yeah, I'll do it. I'd love to. And then when it comes down, well, I don't know if you know,
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Stage
I
fright.
just did one real quick. I just did one that I actually didn't air yesterday that was scheduled to go up yesterday, but the guy, it was him and his son, and we hit on some touchy subjects. And I said, maybe we shouldn't air it. And he said, yeah, I think you're right. So we didn't do it.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
for his son's sake and for his ex-wife. I don't know if his ex-wife would have been
Yeah.
too happy with some of the stuff we were
Yeah.
saying.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask you one other quick question because obviously I went back and looked at the from the lockdown live and real talk. At that point, there was a guy, Joe Mills. Is Joe still involved?
He isn't anymore. No.
Right,
The team sort of like changed around and, moved
right.
around. Yeah.
I didn't mean I didn't because it was funny. The early ones, it was like Joe and Jennica, and then all
Yeah.
of a sudden, Joe gone. I
Yep.
said,
Yep.
Jenica
Yep.
fired his ass. Get out of here, Joe. You're gone. I'm taking over.
I would like to say he gracefully bowed out.
With a shoe in his ass from Jenica.
Got the
I'm
boot.
kidding.
No, I'm kidding. But
Jen beat it. Hey,
I-
that's like the girl that, do you know, a woman said to me, you remind me of a Michael Jackson song. I said,
which
really? She said, yeah, beat it.
really well done.
Yeah.
Ay,
And
ay, ay.
my love life is like the China spy balloon.
The China
I
spy.
keep getting shot down. Oh, now
Oh,
stop, kids.
oh, poor,
Poor Scotty T.
poor
That's some
Scott.
Scotty T. Well, there's some humor
And
there. We
here,
got a few
yeah.
laughs.
Oh, I love it. So
Good,
good.
good. I'm glad you're having fun. Um, Again,
But
just
yeah,
because I want to be sure that, and I will include all Jenica's links to YouTube, her podcast. I did want to ask you, did you see that Google is stopping their podcasts, I think in April?
Google, really?
Yeah.
I have not heard this.
Yeah. I
Why
just saw it
so?
the other night, which I wondered with like you and Scott and because that's something I don't know a lot about the podcast thing.
Hmm.
Where
Yeah.
you have Apple, Google,
Apple, Spotify, Google. There's also these
Spotify.
other like smaller podcast platforms like well, Good Pods is pretty big.
Okay.
But yeah, Google Podcast as well. Those are the main ones. And then yeah, there are like other independent sort of like smaller podcast like platforms that you can have your podcast on, you just like throw in your RSS feed and then it just updates.
Okay.
So I've actually ended up getting a little bit of like traction on Good Pods as well, which is surprising. So apparently a lot of people listen on Good Pods. So it's on there too. And then, yeah, YouTube, but YouTube is more for video. And I'm realizing actually with YouTube, like the target audience is quite different. The kinds of titles and the kinds of like images that they look for are very different. So I've actually started implementing more recently different title names. So my episode titles on my audio podcast would be different from the titles on YouTube. It's something that we're just trying to experiment a little bit with.
Right.
But yes, YouTube, we're on YouTube as well. And I think that's the only platform that we have our video on. And the
I
rest is
saw
audio.
you're doing shorts now, and that's imperative to up the subscriber count.
For sure. It's making a huge difference. I
Yeah.
guess a lot of people, just don't have the patience to sit and watch a 2 hour or 1 hour long video. So
No. Just to be sure, we covered everything, because this is where we're going to get off the rails a little bit. Scotty T's going to flip us over to the comedy side of things here in a
right.
little bit. But I want to
Sure.
make sure before we move on that you covered everything that you want to tell the people about Multispective podcast and the fact that people can get in touch with you and be on the show.
Yeah, for sure. So we're on all social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook. Like we're basically anywhere and
Okay.
everywhere. We're just like bleh, vomit ourselves, like,
I
on
will
all the
include all
platforms.
those links. I will include all those links.
Yes.
And that's the right way to go about it, Jennica. Scott said you always are promoting, always promote your
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's like a full-time job in itself, I mean,
Right.
because you have to be very consistent, you have to be very present, you have to be very relevant, and so you're either listening to other podcasts and trying to, like, squeeze in a comment or two, and let people
Okay.
know that you're in the community as well. And then on the other side, there's also, trying to come up with topics and stories that are also relevant, that people are talking about and listening to, and then also doing your own analytics to see, like, what are the episodes that are hitting the numbers, for example, and like why so, what's so trending about these particular topics, and how can we provide more of these kind of stories for our listeners, because clearly those are the ones that maybe people are responding to and maybe finding some kind of, like, answers or help from. So yeah, it's you're either spending time doing research or contributing to the industry itself, the podcasting community, or
Okay.
you're kind of like, yeah, just promoting, selling your work and your content, right?
Are you
In hopes
pleased
that,
with where you're at right now?
you know, I I am. I'm definitely very, very glad that I have even gotten to the place that I have, because hey, it
Okay.
took me like a good 3 years to even start the podcast. It
Okay.
was just me talking about it for so long,
Okay.
telling people like, "Oh, I have this idea. I have this idea. I want to do something. I want to do
Right.
it." So to have even started it and now to be like well into that journey is, I do,
Okay.
feel really grateful that I managed to get myself there. But of course, every single time you hit a next milestone, you're like, well, what next? What next? Looking for that
Yeah.
next sort of like hit. Um, so, I know and I'm aware that there are bigger podcasts out there that have hit bigger numbers and, received
Right.
more engagement. But I don't look at it in the sense that, like, why am I not here? I look at it as like, okay,
Right.
what is this one doing? What is that one doing? What can I do? How can I? And so that's why you probably notice in my podcast lots and lots of tweaks and changes along the way, along the journey, from
Right.
like lockdown live to real talk to, like, even the
Right.
episode titles went from being really like abstract and cryptic, like caged minds. What does that mean? That could be anything, to now our titles being much more literal. So,
Right.
foster care to violence, you know exactly what to expect. And so, there's been a lot of tweaks along the way. And I think that's the aspect of this journey that I'm really like proud of, because I'm
Right.
really, really noticing what is picking up and what isn't. And I'm like looking into those analytics and, and then going from there. And so the growth has been a consistent, upward,
Yeah.
upward trend.
Well,
Yeah.
there's two parts there to that when you were talking. People said when I said when I get to 10,000 subscribers, I'm going to be happy. And someone said, "No, Scotty T, you'll want 20." And it's true. I
Yep.
got 10 now. I'm at 11.
Yeah.
11,000. And just maybe this will help you, maybe it won't. I just learned this recently. I do the quickies and I do a joke, and I think, man, that's the best. And I performed really well. I did that, and you get 25 views, and there's a little part of me, my heart was in that, and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And someone said to me recently, Scotty, what that should do is tell you that's not, that wasn't a good joke, or maybe you thought it was, but that didn't correlate to the
Mm,
people.
right.
And that's something that I'm still wrestling with. What I'm finding is people like really dirty stuff.
Yes.
When I
I've
do,
noticed that too. It's really
yeah, no,
weird.
I mean, look at your sex work. It's like when I did a joke last night that I absolutely loved, but it just didn't, and I'm still praying because it just went up last night.
Yeah.
But
Right.
you almost have to, like, next, on to the next one.
Yeah. Right. And this is sort of where that research aspect comes in, right? Like looking
Right,
into like the keywords and looking into your competitors to see like what are the ones that are like kicking off and like why?
right.
What is it? What is it? Is it their thumbnails? Is it something in their thumbnails or in their title that's like, calling people in? Or even doing your own kind of like little surveys and asking around, right? But no, I agree. There've been a lot of episodes that I've done and I'm like, this is gonna be massive. And then it gets out there and you're like, oh, okay. I guess people are not as interested as I thought they would be. But then I
Well,
realized that, when I tweak the title and stuff, then it does make a bit of a difference. So maybe it's just not reaching the audience that it needs to. And that's why it's not hitting those numbers.
but I said to you, let's shift gears a little bit. Because it's called Your Comedy Minute, I wanted to know, do you have a favorite, minute or so, not, it doesn't have to be a minute, that you personally that you find, you think back on in Jenica's life and say, that has to be one of the funniest things that ever happened to me.
Oh my God. I'm gonna need him like a minute to think about this. It's been a
Okay.
lot of little funny moments. Hmm.
Maybe when you
You know.
fired Joe Mills. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding you. I'm just kidding you.
Oh
I
goodness
love
me.
making you laugh. I love making people laugh.
Yeah, I love that you do that as well. I feel like I've watched some of your like 1 minute like jokes and it's such a good thing to sort of like listen to or click into when I've just like had a bit of a kind of day. Um, but honestly, I think like just generally like my students sometimes
Yeah.
they've got like they are like little drunken adults. Sometimes the things that they say and the things that they do, you're like, I would do that if I was drunk.
Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah,
no other
yeah.
way I would do this otherwise.
Oh,
I
I
mean,
know a lot
it's
about being drunk.
right?
Yeah, I do. My liver's
Seriously.
twitching right now. It's only 8:15 in the morning, but my liver's twitching right now. But so
No,
you would say your students is where you get a lot of your comedy that keeps you going, makes you laugh.
yeah, and it will just be like, it's like a slapstick movie, right? You walk into school and then these kids will be like, "Hi," and they'll trip over their own feet. And you're like, "Just how did that happen?" Like, what? There is nothing
What is
on the
wrong
ground
with
to
you,
cause
Junior?
this. Yeah,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Exactly. Or like sometimes some of the little answers that they provide in their little notebook,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
so innocently like naughty. And you're like, "Oh, hold on, like no, no, no." Like one of the
And
vocab words
they're
that we
second
taught our
grade. They're
students.
second grade, right?
Second grade, yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the this is really inappropriate. One of the
It's okay.
vocab words that we taught to our kids was vibrate.
Oh
Vibration.
boy.
It was talking about music, right? And like how you can feel the
I
vibration.
got this one. Yeah.
This one girl wrote this message that like I vibrate every time this boy comes to me. And I'm like, excuse moi. I was like, no, 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 no.
My mommy had
No, like
that's
why
funny.
but in her head it was just like I don't know, I guess I shake or I feel nervous or I don't know, I move. I don't know what was the idea behind that, but
Right.
you get these like little comments from kids that are just so innocently
Yeah.
wrong that.
That may be a whole nother thing that you do separately that you just, start compiling them.
Right. Oh, I should send these to you and give them to
Yeah.
be like, here, make a video with these little comments from the kids.
Well, I want to do two quick things because the second one's going to blow you away. We're running out of time. We only got about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, but I wanted to tell you, when you talk about people and you were talking about that there's things in this world that you just don't understand. My favorite in 4 years is a guy named Yuri Talachko. And I'm going to go quick here. Yuri was dating his sex doll. He met the sex doll, but he didn't want to marry her right away. He wanted to date her for a while. So then he married his sex doll, which, her.
Yeah.
But then he cheated on the sex doll with an inanimate object and a supermarket chicken. Now,
What?
Jenica, Jenica, now you say about things you just can't believe, okay?
Yeah.
Last night, and this is true, right hand of God, I saw this guy over on Reddit. He has a duck, and it's him and the duck, and the duck's like eating peas out of his ear and stuff. So I, as a joke, kind of jokingly said, but I got to have you and the duck on my show. Last night, about 7 o'clock, I'm having a few cocktails. I'm getting a little crinkled. And my phone goes off, and it's Boris from Bulgaria with the duck. And do you want to make this happen? So last night, I did a Zoom with him and the duck.
Oh my God.
Wait until it's going to air today.
I need to watch this. I need to
Yeah,
watch
you got to see it.
this.
When you hear the story, Jennica, you're going to flip out.
I need to watch this. I might even want to have him on my podcast too.
Yeah, no, well, he admitted that television stations in Bulgaria have tried to have him on, but he didn't feel comfortable. But I asked nicely, and he thought he'd try it.
Okay.
Oh my God,
I need to know, like, can you give us a little summary of like what was the episode like?
You'll have to wait. It's going to premiere tonight at 7 o'clock.
Okay.
Let me thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording because I don't want to run out of time to talk to you off the air. Okay.
Sure.
Jennica, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully we'll do another one here shortly. I think you're the best, and I'm going to do anything I can to help out the Multispective podcast. Thank you so much for being here, Jennica.
I really, really appreciate it, Scott. I've
Oh,
had
it's
so
my
much
pleasure.
fun with you. Thank you for making me laugh.
Let me stop the recording, and I want to hang with you for a minute, if that's okay.
Sure, sure.
Okay.